Okay, welcome everybody to the extraordinary meeting of the Strategy and Community Committee for Tuesday the 15th of October. Just in regards to health and safety, in the event of any sort of emergency, exiting out through the doors that most of us came in, or out through this door and meeting in the car park next to the St John's building. I don't believe we have any apologies for this meeting. You have got it?
No, through the chair, no.
Okay, thank you. So no apologies at this stage. Are there any councillors with conflict of interest declarations in regards to the decision items on today's agenda? Any recording device? We are being live streamed and hence recorded as part of that process. Any announced urgent business? Excellent. Okay. Moving to confirmation of the minutes of the 10th of September 2024. I'll just do a quick page turn for accuracy. Page 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Excellent. Is someone willing to move that that's a true and correct record? Thank you, Councillor Armstrong. Thank you, Councillor Davies. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Abstentions? Carried. Okay, and we're moving straight to our decision items. So, page number 10. And welcome. It's great to have you here, Maria. And got your sidekick with you as well, fantastic. I'm going to hand just directly over to you to take us through this child protection policy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the report, policies and appendices are on pages 10 through to 38 of this agenda, and there's just a couple of key points that I want to note. So under the Vulnerable Children's Act 2014, a child protection policy must be in place for all providers of children's services. So for council, it's regulated services such as libraries, swimming pools, community centres, and our youth waste education programs. The policy must also be reviewed every 3 years, so we're playing catch up this year. And the sections that have been updated in the 2024 version include safe working practices, and that's on page 19. We've got safety checks, which is on pages 19 and 20. There's a training section, and I'll come back to that in a moment. Detecting and responding to abuse, which is on pages 20 and 21. And there's some new definitions just to be really clear about who we're talking about and what we actually mean. So in terms of the 2024 policy, it addresses issues that council employees, volunteers, councillors and contractors need to be made aware of to keep a child safe when interacting with the council. In terms of the training section, which is on page 20, the last sentence needs to be reworded to read that the responsibility for training and basic child protection sits with human resources rather than the community partnerships team and the human resources manager effectively. So that's a bit of a catch-all, and human resources are responsible for training anyway, so it's just to capture that. In terms of the appendices that are attached to the policy, they're about processes and guidelines and forms which will assist council employees, volunteers and councillors and contractors with the proper course of action to take when they're presented with indications of child abuse or neglect. So for the purposes of this committee, we're asking the Strategy and Community Committee to adopt the updated 2024 child protection policy and Joe and I are here to take any questions if you have any.
Fantastic, thank you. I make the assumption that everybody's noted that the significance is medium and that everybody's read those changes. So can I just clarify just before we move on? So this is the first time that a council committee has adopted this particular policy, and that's because of the changes now requiring not only staff but councillors, etc. Fabulous, right? Any questions? Thanks, Mara.
Thank you. Can I just ask, do we need to change the name when it's referred right through the policy to as councillors as well as staff? It's got employee policy. So should that title reference something different, particularly when we're talking about elected members being captured in the policy and the intent of their policy? So that was just a question I had. And just, if I just may with another, it would be good to also note MTFJ when we talk about the youth programs as well, because youth that is another program that we provide as a council that has a lot of interaction. Yeah, so perhaps just a couple of things. And the only other thing I saw on page 21, there was a spelling in the second.
Page 21.
Yeah, page 21, emotional abuse causing should be severe, I guess. Yes. Yeah, in the second sentence.
Yes,
yeah.
Well done.
So just my thoughts, and maybe if there are any perhaps around the titles really important to me, or to understand if it should be called something different.
Yeah, no, it should just be a council policy.
Yeah.
That's why this is hanging over from the other one, so we can sort that.
Yeah, great.
Just in regards to that, in regards to MTFJ, which is a really good point that you've raised, Murray, would that be encompassed because those people involved or the youth involved, some of them would be under 18?
So through the chair, the policy relates to all young people under the age of 18 we interact with. So that would include the participants of MTFJ. And just through the chair in response, Murray, to the including MTFJ, we don't actually specify who are youth either. We just talk about the waste education, library and swimming pools because they're regulatory provision. But this would obviously apply to all of our programme. But in terms of, are you meaning the young people that are on the programme but come into contact with?
Yes, sorry, I probably didn't articulate that.
So,
because they're not employees,
no,
or volunteers, or councillors, or contractors, but they're another group who might possibly be coming into contact with.
Yeah, so through the chair, with our youth leaders that are over 18, we police check them and we give this policy to our youth leaders because there might be a 20-year-old young person on our youth programme interacting with a 12-year-old going on overnight camps. So it is a consideration that we have with those. With MTFJ currently, because they come in one-on-one and in small groups working with the team and then placed into employment, they don't generally have regular contact with, wouldn't have contact with young people on the programs, but they would if we had past work model where we did have them working alongside each other, but they were employed, therefore they were then under this policy. So it's a bit complex to navigate, but I think
that was the example I was thinking of actually when we opened the pool and we had the Mayor's Task Force, we had a number of them helping out and doing barbecues and whatnot. But I understand your clarity. Does that answer your question sufficiently, Mary?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really comfortable with that. But the reason I probably cited MTFJ is when I went to the governance group in Wellington a couple of weeks ago, there was a strong recommendation for councils to ensure we had this policy, so I was really pleased to see it come to this meeting, but that it actually did capture the intent of MTFJ. But because it's obviously been a bit of an exposure, which is important. So I'm really happy with that.
You're timely then.
Yeah, perfect.
Councillor McPherson, I saw that you had your hand.
Thank you. Through the chair, I just want to draw your attention to page 30, the Youth Code of Conduct, which I just realised that it's got written there that it's the Code of Conduct.
Oh, well done.
I gather that this is not for, clearly it's not for the youth.
Through the chair, no, this is this we put in place quite recently because we're engaging with a lot of contractors and volunteers outside of our staff team. We put together just the best practice code of conduct for specifically for our youth program. So it's here as an appendix because it's something we consider things like that come into child protection and safeguarding around communicating with young people online, when we're transporting young people. So it's connected, that's why I think we've included it as an appendix, but it's specific to the youth program.
Okay, can I ask you under the do's, closer to the bottom, the challenge learning and behaviours, support conversation and learning, you've used examples of pronouns, swearing and upholding te tiriti o waitangi. Can I ask why that's in there, the te tiriti o waitangi?
So through the chair I can respond to that. So that's really around our bicultural practice within our program, and when we're engaging with volunteers, it's about the respect and how we uphold it. It's specified in a lot of our youth work practice. So
could I ask that is actually changed therefore to reflect both versions of the treaty, or replaced with the Human Rights Act possibly? Or I question why it's relevant, or if you feel it's relevant.
yeah, through the chair I can take that back to our team when we were coming up with the guidance around that, but it doesn't necessarily sit with this policy as a thing, but I can certainly take it back.
It's not that I feel it needs to be excluded as such, but I just feel that if we're going to start talking about constitutional history, we need to give the bigger picture, and it needs to be both versions of the treaty need to be presented. I know I keep going on about that, I did in the last meeting, but these people need to have the facts and be informed. Otherwise, it's kind of disinformation, really.
Yeah.
So, cool. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Armstrong.
Yes, thank you, through you, Madam Chair. I just wondered, there's quite a lot of responsibility put on the likes of yourself and Rhea and so on in terms of the flow charts and taking responsibility and so on. So I just wanted to check that we've got appropriate levels of training and support in place for you folks as well. I don't need to know all the ins and outs of that, and I imagine, for instance, if you're part of a professional, like it's collective or something, there'll be provision for that. But I just want to make sure, having worked in child protection myself for many years, it is a big responsibility. If something like this is reported, it requires quite a fast, but kind of clear and calm and whatever response. So it's more just in the interest of making sure that you guys feel you've got the support, but also the skills and the knowledge and stuff yourselves to bear that responsibility.
The chair would respond, thank you, because it is acknowledging that it is a tricky space to navigate, and personally I've been in that space for a long time, so I have experienced those situations, so I feel confident with that. But I think that's where some of these updates have come from, is we've put a lens over it and gone, this needs to make sure this is really fit for purpose for the type of work that we're doing in our community. In terms of the training, yes, from within our community team, within our youth team, we have sort of the training that we will put our teams through. Where it sits with people and capabilities and with human resources is about how do we best support those of our colleagues in other areas of the organisation that perhaps don't have those professional bodies that we sit with. So for our pools and our libraries that are coming into regular contact with young people and families, that we're making sure that we are all best placed to do those supports. From a personal perspective, yes, we feel absolutely confident in that space. But I acknowledge that whoever's in this role has to come in with a level of that understanding and experience and support. We, through the youth team, we have professional supervision, which a lot of this falls into, external supervision, but that's not necessarily the case across other colleagues.
That's right.
So, yeah,
That's partly where I was coming from.
so I think the responsibility sits with HR and the teams identifying what their needs are in their areas, but certainly we can be a point of reference
to them as well. That sounds good. And it sounds like you've thought it all through. You're comfortable with what you've come up with, and that you're confident you can pull it all off. So that's great. This might be me being picky, but it seems like we've swapped from HR manager to people and capability manager through here. And I just wondered about, I think the flowcharts and some of that informs still HR. It's just a consistency thing.
So through you, Madam Chair, I did check with HR and
Oh, good.
Accountability, and I wanted to check exactly that, what the unit and what the team's called now. So they are still known as the Human Resources Unit. However, Tamara is known as the People and Capability Manager.
Okay. Well, that's fine. So actually, that's completely fine. I just had a random thought, and this probably relates to down on page 23 under definitions. Got volunteer there. I'm just conscious that we have, and I imagine this happens across the district, when there are working bees, for instance, working on our reserves and that kind of thing. You know, we often have young people working in part of and working bees. So there might be reserve advisory groups, or there might be community committees or whatever. And I'm just wondering if they're not included as, well, they're included as volunteers, but I'm just wondering if we need to bring this to the attention of community committees or anything. I might be overthinking it, but I do know we have young people, high school age and even senior primary school age, who've been involved in working bees in our area and planting. So just a thought.
Through the chair, I mean, I'm comfortable with this end of the spectrum on this, and would say absolutely, we need to make sure anyone working with our young people is aware. But I think that probably goes to the committees to be one, made aware that this exists, because sometimes it's that initial awareness raising, and then see how that then translates in that practice. But certainly, you know, throughout lots of activity in the district, there will be acute awareness of things like this, depending on who's running the activities, but also not, and I guess that's where the risk comes in. And if those committees are then, if part of council, then we need to make sure that we're applying that lens to all those spaces. But that's a personal perspective. I can't speak for, you know.
It was just a thought that I had, and also being picky on page 29. Mentions the Ministry of Vulnerable Children, and I wonder if we needed to change that to it's just a picky thing, because these things, I used to joke when I worked at Charity Through Family that I had to check my payslip to see what my organisation was called. I do know they've changed their name a few times, but I think that's probably the current one. I mean, I thought this was actually really good policy and seems really robust, and it seems like you've thought of a lot of stuff, and you've got it from my point of view, it's based on really sound principles. And so I think it's a really good job, actually. And as I said, my thoughts were just kind of picky. So well done.
Thank you, Karen. I would echo your thoughts actually in my reading of it. I think it was very robust as well. Councillor Davies.
Hi, yeah. Quick look at safety checks, which is the very bottom of page 19 and the top of page 20. And the overall responsibility for safety checks sits with the capability manager. And then it says it will include an interview, reference checking, identity check, police vetting. Is that guaranteed? Because it doesn't actually sort of say that it's compulsory. It almost is a little bit vague. And if you look at the last bullet point, an assessment of any risk the employee, volunteer, councillor or contractor may pose. I find that somewhere along the line there, someone is deciding if someone may pose a risk or may not. So that means that there could be marginal cases there where it's close to you know, may pose is something I don't feel, you know, if there is any risk, in my opinion, then they should not be permitted to do that. If there is any risk whatsoever, because the may allows, to me, allows for a little bit of almost debate and then when someone is actually going to make a decision whether or not that person is a risk or not, depending on the evidence in front of them. I would prefer that to be a little bit tighter to say that if there were any risk whatsoever, they would not.
Through the chair, if I can respond from the first point you made, all of those are included.
So they
It's
are
not
there.
optional, is included. My understanding, well, I believe where that assessment comes is if somebody has a police record that comes back with a positive, it depends on that, what that positive is, whether that is then a risk to that young person. So if it's, to give an example, something to do with either sexual violence or physical harm, that would be a complete no. But if it was perhaps somebody with a history 20 years ago in, can't think of something off the top of my head, stealing cars, would that be a, you know, assessing that risk? Because it is a risk, but we need to assess if it's a risk that we'd be prepared to take. But I absolutely hear what you're saying, Councillor Davies, in terms of that needs to be really clear. So the wording of that, perhaps, just to remove may. That poses a risk.
I guess the way that I read it, and it might have been different, so this might be helpful or not, was that these things would happen and then anything out of there would go. So it's almost like that bullet point is a standalone after those other four, you know, after those other four bits and pieces are done, the police vetting, the identity check, the reference checking and the interview, just as you described. Welcome, Dave.
So through the chair, if we remove that in attachment to that list and had it as a separate point saying following this, an assessment of risk, that would pose a risk.
How do you
to
feel
the
about
child.
that, Councillor Davies? Is that?
Yeah, I think that yeah, when you get to that, it does make it clearer that when all the evidence is in front of you, then someone will make an assessment.
I get comfort
Oh, sorry.
around that,
Oh, did you want
around
to?
that point, comfort around that point. Yep. And sorry, you had something else?
Yeah. On page 30 again, on the do's and don'ts. Very, very minor, under gifts on the don'ts, it's got actiony.
Actions.
Action. Yeah. And one other minor point on this, I'm thinking here of, say for example, under the dress code, I'm thinking of something like if our youth council went with some young people to the pools or something like that. Whilst I probably wouldn't wear a bikini or Speedos, but some of our younger volunteers in the youth council might choose to wear more skimpy swimwear in a situation like that. Is that don't an absolute, or is it
So through the chair, if I can respond to that, when we do a code of conduct and we go through it with each contractor or volunteer specific to them. These are like, it's a snapshot of things, and that's an example, but we'd say if they were an 18-year-old young person on the youth council that was volunteering, well, they're actually are young people too, so that doesn't apply as such to them. But if it's myself, you know, it's about just being appropriate just amongst, you know, younger people. But I do hear what you're saying. It's that
It is quite specific, isn't it?
It's quite specific because it comes up, you know, it is a it's very culturally across different cultures, and the thing that often gets pulled out as examples of how we approach code of conduct and how we approach work in a.
Because I was just thinking, you know, that the youth council went with our visitors from China recently to the hot pools, and you know, and they were all mucking in and having a good time together, but they are still our youth council and still volunteering to help and support those visitors from overseas. And so, you know, it might be hard to police. Just,
Through the chair, perhaps our wording on that should be adult staff, volunteers and contractors. Make it just clearer then, because our young people are young people first and then they volunteer for us secondly.
just in the
That's good.
Probably, on page 22, now that this policy is referencing staff and elected members, and just looking at 4.9, in the case of an elected member, it's probably, well, do you find it, is it best practice for the elected member to talk with the manager, relevant manager in this instance, or because their normal pathway would be to come through to the mayor? Yeah, so I'm wondering whether we need to make an exception in this policy that it actually is directed to an appropriate manager, or is there a step, you know what I mean? And then that conversation, then say you need to talk to whom, you know?
So if it came up through staff and came to a manager and our councillor,
Yeah.
the manager would come to me, I'd come to you.
Yeah,
So, you know, the hierarchy of these things would be followed.
yeah. So do you think as it's written is,
Immediately raise it with the manager, the line manager, and the line manager will say, yeah, well, I can't deal with this, it's got to go upstairs.
Yeah.
So,
okay, I mean, as long as it's just clear for if you're an elected member, who you're going to talk with in the event, yeah,
so elected members, they're talking about staff that even come through me.
yeah,
But
Yeah.
if it's through the chair, sorry, this is also applies to, because this policy would sit on the website, so it's public for appearance.
Yeah.
I know to see.
Yeah.
So they might say, actually, I've got an issue with Joe Sherwood, so they would go through the relevant manager. But
Yeah.
if they had issue with, apologies.
Yeah.
Councillor, then who would they go to? So I guess
Yeah.
it does possibly
that's what I
just
was,
need wording to say, oh, see.
yeah,
Yeah, but if they go to the relevant manager, they'll come to
It
me
would go
anyway,
same
so,
way,
yeah.
yeah, okay, I mean, as long as it's clear in the pathway, because often you need a quick and rapid response, you know, so you don't want to be, yeah, that's okay. And then it's just a small thing is, it's got Kaikoura District Council's logo on those templates, 32 through to 30, whatever, 37 and 38.
Through the chair, these are lifted, this appendix is lifted from our information management system, ProMap, which is where we record our
Oh.
processes, and I think but the two councils we obviously share our IT,
Oh.
that system is shared across both
Right, so it's going to be a shared document,
Yeah.
okay, I'm
Oh,
totally,
well,
totally
just-
okay.
Not necessarily a shared document, but that
The system
process.
The system shared, yeah, okay, I'm cool with that, but other than that, I think it's great, thank you.
Thanks, councillor Armstrong.
Yeah, just one more picky thing on page 29, since we're changing this to a broader application, I wonder if instead of staff members' name and position, you like notifiers, name. Oh, yeah. Because the notifier might not be a staff member.
And if you're gonna do that, you have to change where it says staff signature down the bottom.
Yeah,
to-
signature,
Yeah.
yeah.
your signature.
Yeah, well spotted.
So, councillor Hislop, I just wanted to check in with you whether you had any comment or questions in regards to the policy. All good, fabulous. Okay, so it feels like there are some minor changes, and thank you for answering those questions and queries and responding to them positively. So is there somebody who is online to make a recommendation to adopt with those minor changes? Thank you, councillor Armstrong. Thank you, Mayor Black. Any further comments or anyone wishing to speak for or against? Okay, then I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Abstentions? Excellent. Thank you so much, Joe, and thank you, Maria. Well done. Okay, so we're moving to page 39 to the cemeteries bylaw. Oh, goodness me. Right, welcome, Aidan and Stephanie. Lovely to have you here. Again, I'm just going to hand straight over to you guys.
Taking this report as read, the Cemeteries Bylaw requires a review under section 159 of the Local Government Act, which requires the bylaw to be reviewed no later than 10 years after its last review. In this case, the last review was in 2014, so this is the 10-year period now. So based on the review we've conducted of the bylaw, it's recommended that the committee agrees for public consultation on the proposed amendments of the bylaw, including the specific consultation with Mana Whenua. The recommended changes have been proposed by the amenities and maintenance team, the district sexton and the reporting officers, and it's all been reviewed by council's lawyers and the chief steward and community officer. In terms of the policy implications, Stephanie wrote these, so I'll let her talk to them.
Cool. So I'll just run through the Local Government Act implications. This section is also relevant for our following item, the livestock movement bylaw, but we'll talk about the specifics of that. So as Aidan said, this is the 10-year review. Under the Local Government Act, when we're reviewing bylaws, there are some questions that we need to look at. These need to be looked at for a new bylaw and for a revision as well. So the basic questions are, you need to look at whether a bylaw is still the most appropriate way of addressing the wording in the local government as perceived problem. I've said it as issue of addressing the issue. Whether the bylaw is still the most appropriate form of bylaw, and whether it gives rise to any implications under the Bill of Rights Act. So these all got assessed at the time these bylaws came into place and during the 5-year review, which happened in 2014. So as part of that assessment, we consider that retaining the cemeteries bylaw is still the most appropriate way to deal with this issue, which is managing cemeteries, and it allows council to continue to undertake our statutory responsibilities and our ethical duties of the management, operation, care and maintenance of cemeteries. And it is noted that we have had some form of cemeteries bylaw since 1986. In terms of the form, we consider the form of it still to be appropriate. Some changes are recommended, which Aidan will discuss further, but the basic form, structure, and layout is considered appropriate to the function, the size of what we need, and to meet the operational needs of what we need to do. In terms of the Bill of Rights Act, so obviously this would have been considered when the 2008 bylaw was a new bylaw, and the 2014 review was done. We do note, so there are some changes proposed, which Aidan will go through. Some are for health and safety reasons. There is also a clause we're recommending to be more inclusive and considerate cultural and religious matters. So we do know that that's broadly in line with the Bill of Rights, which advocates for freedom of religion. So we don't consider that to be going against that.
So looking at the recommended changes, they include some minor amendments, which are small to do with typographical, grammatical, and some updates to the terminology. The key terminology changes are just changing burial to interment, as this then covers both the burial of cremated remains along with full body burials, where burial only covers full body burials. So the other terminology change is the addition of the term plot, which encompasses all the plot types already listed in the definition, so it just clears up the rest of the bylaw there. There was also a number of significant clauses that I will outline. So first one is clause 6.5, which allows for the cultural and religious interments that fall outside the more Western style of burial, which is allowed in the current bylaw. So this has been recommended by me and with support from the amenities and maintenance team leader, and it's based off of the cemeteries bylaw from the Grey District, where they have this clause added, but slightly different wording there. The changes to clause 7.1, 7.4 and 7.5 are shown as 7.5 and 7.6, sorry, in the document, because there was an error with the writing of it just wouldn't be fixed. So these were all recommended by the amenities and maintenance team leader along with the district sexton. 7.1 has seen a partial deletion, as the current bylaw allows for cremated remains to be buried without the funeral director or sexton necessarily being in the plot or filling in the plot. And this has left a bit of a mess for the sexton on a number of occasions where he's had to go out and fix up all these plots. So he's wanted to see that cleared up. 7.4 has been recommended as some internments have seen health and safety risks just with the open graves that are big and people can fall in. It's just a bit of an issue, so making sure that they can't fall on themselves is kind of the need for that one. And 7.5 was the requirement for a funeral director to be present, as currently it's becoming more common. The sexton scene has become more common for people to, in a cost saving measure, not appoint a funeral director. So then the health and safety falls on the sexton, and he now has to be present at all funerals, which falls as a cost to council and also takes up his time, and he can't be two places at once if that's ever occurring as well. So those are the main changes. And looking at the possible options, the officers recommend that following the discussions with the operational team that deals with this bylaw on a day-to-day basis, that the committee agrees to the recommended consultation outlined in points 21 to 25, as the other option is to just undertake the minor grammatical and typographical errors that will require no consultation, but we don't recommend this as the operational team has seen the need for these clauses to be added in. And if there's any questions, please let us know.
Aidan, Mr. Frank. Okay, yep, Councillor McPherson.
Let's go. Chair, I just wanted to ask you, clause 6.5. You've said here that a person may request dispensations from the requirements of this bylaw. Do we need, does that apply to all of the requirements or select requirements?
We were looking at it on a, I think, in a writing, if I find it exactly, it's meant to be on the sextons kind of taking each one individually based on what they're wanting to do. It's not, you can't get dispensation from the whole thing, but if they are wanting to do the burial themselves, they want to fill in the plot based on a religious or cultural reason, then that would be allowed through the sexton. Not because the bylaw doesn't allow that due to the previous messes being made, but it just allows the sexton to make a decision based on their wanting and their need.
Thank you. So look further to that. Does that mean that there could be a chance that someone could actually bury a body at a different depth to somebody else?
If that were the sexton's discretion, but I assume if he allows that, then yes.
Is there do you think that there could or should be a need to perhaps put a little bit of criteria around? I mean, you say it's a case by case basis, but do you think that perhaps we should consider, I don't know, putting a ring, not a ring fence, but maybe just providing some criteria around that? Because I know that it's an important clause to include. I'm not disagreeing with that, but I think it's a little bit too loose.
Yeah, we initially it was a bit more full there, and we took it to the lawyers and they kind of cut it down a wee bit to make this far easier to read. But I imagine, because to do the burial that's through an application, I imagine we could put something on the application that kind of outlines what you're looking to do differently there, because chucking more and more words into the bylaw, stopping this is for certain things only, then it just becomes more and more complicated for everyone looking at it.
I mean, I say that because I think we have to take these things into account, but I think there has to be an element of fairness to it as well. I don't think it's fair that someone should be allowed to plant a tree on one plot and somebody else can't. But more importantly, the depth of the burial to me is something that should be kind of standardised, even for, I'm not going to say health and safety reasons, but there has to be some requirements.
Yeah. I mean, it could be something we look at adding in. We can talk to the amenity team leader about that again and just see what their thoughts on that.
Yeah, and just through the chair, so clause 7.2 does have the suggested or recommended depths for the two bodies, one body cremated remains. So if the sexton did get an application under suggested clause 6.5, that would be obviously what they'd be starting from.
Yes.
If it was probably a lot outside that, they'd probably say it wasn't appropriate anyway. But we'd have to consider that within what's actually allowed under the bylaw, and health and safety would probably.
So you wouldn't include in 6.5 an exclusion of some requirements then on that basis? Or am I being too picky?
We could, I mean, we could go back to the lawyer and ask that. Again, the authorised officer would be considering it from the point of view of they'd start at the rules of the bylaw and then see if it's appropriate to go over or beyond.
I guess, look, I understand that. I just keep going back to the fact that it says dispensations from the requirements. Should it not say from some requirements?
It possibly could. We probably have to be quite specific here, because we'll talk about which clauses could or could not be changed. But we can go back to the witness from there.
No, it sounds a bit, I just think it's important to make sure that everyone's aware of. I think that there has to be a lot of an even playing field in this scenario, even taking into account the religious and cultural factors.
Thanks. Councillor Davies?
Yeah, just a very quick one. This precludes pets from being buried with their owners, does it? If someone was particularly close to a pet who died at a very similar time,
yeah,
that wouldn't be possible.
I mean, they could potentially come under 6.5 if the wording of that changed slightly as well, but.
Through the chair, that's not the intention of
Yes,
the
I accept.
There's something to do with human internments.
Yeah.
Does it say that somewhere?
Yeah.
Need to, might be the case.
So interment includes the burial of the deceased human body
Oh,
in the
yes,
grave plot
yes.
and the burial of cremated human remains in a cremation
Yes.
plot.
Yeah,
That's pretty specific, that's human.
Yep, so that covers your question, I think. Councillor Armstrong?
7.3, you've mentioned how many bodies you can put in, no more than 2 in one grave or lawn plot, and then you've said 4 cremated bodies for 1 cremation plot. Then you've said it's okay to put cremated remains into a grave plot or a lawn plot where 2 bodies have already been buried. I'm wondering, do we need to set an upper limit? I'm just thinking that these plots can be quite expensive. You know, how many more lots of ashes could you put in? And is that intended to be 1 or doesn't it matter? Or
You can bury multiple lots of ashes into a grave plot.
so it wouldn't matter.
Well, there will be an upper limit, but I don't
The upper
know.
limit's 4 cremated bodies in the same plot.
I think what Councillor Armstrong is saying, she's read that 4, but it's the bit that said cremated remains can be interred where bodies have already been buried. So if there's already 2 bodies, does that mean we can only allow 2 sets of ashes?
No, 4 sets of ashes where there's two bodies in the plot.
But you can only have 4 sets of 4 sets. Yeah, I understand yeah. So it says you can have 4 sets of cremated bodies, or you can have 2 bodies plus an unnamed number of cremated remains. So do we just need to adjust that?
Through the chair, I think in that sense, the last reference to cremated remains, I think, would mean 1, not multiple.
No, we allow multiple sets of cremated remains in those grave plots.
But isn't it then saying 1 more on top of that?
No, we currently allow multiple. So I think we should have an upper limit of 4, so we should specify that, but check with the amenities team and the sexton, but we currently allow multiple sets of cremated remains to go into the grave plot.
Might be that we just remove the word cremation and just leave it as any 1 plot, because then it means that even if there's 2 bodies in the plot, you still only have 4 in any plot. That might make.
I mean, it's probably, I can think of a couple of examples probably where it's a single plot, but you know, the burials on top of each other, and then if a child is deceased in that family, it's the child of the parents might want to go as ashes in that same plot, or even if it's, I'm thinking about Waikato Cemetery, there's several examples, even with those old concrete covered plots, if you like, whatever they're called, you know, with the filled, not lawn. You know, there are ashes placed on top of you know, so I mean, so there could be two bodies in there and one set of ashes of a child, or, you know, I mean, so, but I think we're probably overthinking what the outcome would be. I can only think of examples where it would be a parent and a child, you know, and it's unlikely to be multiple. I mean, it's not saying it's not.
Tom was contemplating if he had 3 boys.
But your point there, Mari, if a family of parents and 3 or 4 young children were killed in a car accident,
Yeah.
they may want to all go in. It may be appropriate that the relatives would want them all to go into one.
But if it was that type of scenario, then they're likely to be actually in the casket. The probability of being in a casket together is more likely rather than a casket in a cremated or whatever. So I think in those situations where you're talking about that likelihood, I think there'll be other actions at play that would enable one casket and perhaps potentially 2. Yeah. So
I think the question really is around if there's a maximum of 4 cremated bodies, then in one plot, then shouldn't it be a maximum of 4 inclusive of 2?
It's looking more at how much of the ground's been taken up by the bodies. If it's a whole body, it's definitely taken up more than the cremated remains. So I think it's, from what I'm reading, I think that the word cremation probably needs to be removed, and then it encompasses all plots, and it makes sense for it to be 2 bodies and then the 4 cremated bodies.
So would that make it easier for an officer to consider when an exception, because it's going to be an exception to for an officer to actually understand a policy that's written like that? Would removing the word cremation make it easier for, because an officer is going to have to determine this. If someone come across the front desk and ask for 2 and 2 or whatever in one.
Well, I think the removal of cremation will help there, but then also potentially going back to 6.5, if we add a special circumstances kind of situation, because if you're saying like 7 people die in the same accident kind of scenario, then the 6 doesn't work anyway. So there could be a scenario where it's cultural, religious, and special circumstances. So that potentially it comes something like that.
I think so. Yeah. I see some nods. So perhaps that's a minor change. Thank you, Councillor Armstrong.
Just Tom's dog consideration before. I'm now on a few pages later, page 50, and vehicles in stock in the cemetery. I'm just thinking about the Waikari Cemetery is in a beautiful spot with a great view. So I know people go and walk their dogs up there, but is that prohibited?
Dog isn't. The definition of stock does show up later in the livestock movement, so I believe that we've used stock as it would be sheep.
Yeah, no, that's what I thought you meant, but I didn't see anywhere. I'm not saying we should say put it in that they can. I just wanted to check because, as I said, it's a green space that, you know, is sort of contained, fenced, and that I happen to know that people walk their dogs in there, so I just thought I'd ask.
I believe stock relates to
we don't
any
want
farming
bunch of
animal.
sheep.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, no worries.
Okay. Thanks, Mari.
Thank you. Can I just ask, looking at page 48, and it's referenced there on 10.1, but it's referenced elsewhere as well. And it's actually the word tombstone. And I guess I was just, is tombstone still a term that we would use? It seems like a very old term and you know, when we're revamping. And is it headstone now that we might reference as or like tombstone feels to me like the really old cemeteries that are, you know, 6 foot high in the really old part of our cemeteries. But I don't know, it just I wondered whether there is a more up-to-date term. It doesn't matter one way or the other, but I just thought if we're updating it, do we still use the word tombstone?
I think headstone is probably the more common for that.
Yeah.
And
So
then
there's several places that maybe it needs to be picked up and changed then if that's the case, on page 48 and 49. Thank you.
And,
That's
if
great.
and I guess if someone was going to erect a tombstone, it would be covered by or other memorial, so.
In 10.4 limits the height of them.
Any other questions or suggestions for amendments?
Can I just ask, it's maybe not covered in the bylaw as such, but quite often what happens, you know, after a recent burial, when it takes a little bit of time for the soil to settle, and then should it be picked up in here that is it the role of the family, is it the role of the sexton to go back and within a time period and top up the grave where it's sunk and then grass it down? Is that just part of the admin of, is that a sexton duty? Should it be captured in here, or is that just the duty of?
No, it's part of the contract with the sexton, that's their role, so.
Yeah.
Just leave that as an operational matter.
Right, so it doesn't need to be identified here. Okay, that's fine, because it's often an issue that crops up for people.
And so the recommendation was that we agree to public consultation. I just wondered, are there any comments or questions about that, or are we all comfortable with that? And really ready for somebody to move that recommendation?
Just one quick question, and I've just scanned it, and I could have misread it, but 13.2, removal of monuments. No person may without authority remove or take from any cemetery or from any plot any vase, wreath, plant, flower, or any other thing except where the council requires the removal. So if I go and put a vase, because I can't plant anything there, if I go and put a vase there or a river, can I not remove that vase? Is that what that's saying, or have I misread that?
It doesn't say, I guess it says without authority, it doesn't say authority from who. So if it's your vase, do you think that?
Well, it wouldn't read, I don't think a layman would read it like that though.
Through the chair, I think it would be without authority from authorised officer would be what would be implied.
No, but what I'm saying is if I've taken a vase down to my plot, my relative, and I've put flowers in it, and then I decide to, for whatever reason, take that vase home, that's basically saying I need authority to do that. Is that right? Or have I misread it?
That's my understanding.
Should that be right?
Is it going to read it and enforce it, so why bother worrying about it?
Because it's the bylaw, and I think it's got to be right. And I think too, that doesn't seem right to me. Vase, wreath, plant or flower.
Do you think, I'm guessing that that's in there just to protect people who have taken plants or flowers or vases or whatever from anybody else removing them. So I was quite comfortable with it saying no person may without authority. I just assumed that authority wasn't, wasn't council authority, because if it's your vase, you kind of own it, you have the authority to remove it, no? Or maybe I'm doing that wrong.
If I take a plant, again, I'm going on about it, if I take a plant here and it's dying, I should be able to pick it up and take it home again and replace it with a new one, and just not replace it. The way that reads is that I actually need permission to do that.
So this clause has been there since at least 2014, if not 2008. I mean, if you did want to suggest removing or changing it in some way, we could obviously work with that.
I'm really comfortable with the wording as written. It's stood us in good stead and without complication. And when I visit the cemetery on a reasonably regular basis, if the Norwest's been through and there's a whole lot of flowers that have come from people's graves, I will pick them up and tidy the place up. So, I think a lot of people would do that without being captured by, doing it right or doing it wrong. We just do it because we want the place to be presentable and tidy, and I do that every time I go there. So, in breaking the bylaw, so be it.
So therefore, does it need to be there?
I wonder, I guess it's a protection, so somebody doesn't decide they are going to deliberately go and remove something that you know, someone else has put there that is a special vase or a, I don't know.
Or if you're gonna take your husband a bunch of flowers, don't go down the cemetery and grab them.
So if something was to occur, we've got something in the bylaw that would give us some ability to follow that. Rightio. Okay, so looking to see if we're at a point where there is someone who's willing to, yeah, thanks, Mari. So,
Minor adjustments, happy to,
yep.
and
so as the recommendations written, that the Strategy and Community Committee provides input on the recommended changes to the amended bylaw and agrees to public consultation on the proposed amendments, including specific consultation with Mana Whenua.
Can I just verify? So it's changing tombstone to headstone, and we'll seek further legal advice on the cultural and religious one. Yeah, so would you like to, we can come back and circulate wording by email, is that? Or
How does it feel about that?
well,
Yeah.
I'm pretty relaxed about the whole thing, to be fair.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, yeah, that sounds good. So I'm looking for a seconder for that recommendation. Thank you, Councillor Davies. Any further questions, comments, anyone wishing to speak for or against? All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Abstentions? Right, and we stayed at the table to move on to the,
How are we going to get people to, you know, in the consultation, how are we going to make sure that people understand that this is the time frame? What's our method of telling people?
Just been in conversation with Annabelle about that, and we're having a meeting with her tomorrow about how we go about the public conversation. It's something I'm involved with before, so
Yeah.
we'll talk about that. But she said she's going to be something in the paper. There was going to be on the social media, the paper, and there was one other thing that I can't quite remember. Yeah.
so, so just in terms of the consultation, because we consider it to be nothing of major significance,
Yeah.
low, we don't need to do the formal statement of proposal and
Yeah.
public notice, but
Yeah.
we still think it's appropriate to do consultation,
Yeah.
about a month with those measures aid has just gone through. We'd also, but particularly because of the cultural clause, like to consult Mana Whenua
Yeah.
specifically as part of that.
Yeah, no, that's great. I'm really happy. I understood that. Just follow that through and encourage people. I guess, how we look at it.
exactly, okay. Livestock movement bylaw, page 52. Welcome back.
So taking the report as read again, the livestock movement bylaw is under the same situation as the cemeteries bylaw, that under section 159 of the Local Government Act requires the review every 10 years, and this last review of this bylaw was again in 2014. So based on the review of this bylaw, it is recommended that the committee agrees for public consultation on proposed amendments. The recommended changes have been proposed by the roading team, as they are the operational team on this matter, and the reporting officers, and it's all been reviewed by the council lawyers again and the chief strategy and community officer. In terms of the policy implications, Stephanie will talk about that again.
Yes, so as we outlined the cemeteries bylaw, the Local Government Act criteria that you have to revisit during the review. So we still consider a bylaw the most appropriate way of dealing with this issue, because it's the most appropriate way for council to manage the movement of livestock in terms of our operational network, of our roading network, in terms of the management, safety, protection, operation of the network. We've had discussions with the roading team. They have indicated that the number of permits has decreased since the 2016 earthquake. So a lot of farmers tend to be doing it by truck now. So even though there's been an overall decrease, we still think it's appropriate to have that there for when it's required. In terms of the form, again, the basic form, structure and layout is considered appropriate to the size and scale of the issue and the operational needs of the team. In terms of the Bill of Rights Act and the issues under The 2008 bylaw and the 2014 review both considered this broadly at the time. There are 2 clauses with recommended changes that Aidan will go through. I do note that they don't change the intent of the clause. So we don't consider that they bring up any issues under the rights.
So of the amendments, there are a couple of minor changes, including terminology, grammatical errors and typographical errors, with the 2 terminology main ones being the addition of the term excessive excrement, as this term is used within the bylaw but not defined within the definition, so they need to be added according to our lawyers. And the amendment of the definition of livestock, which provided more definitive definition of what livestock was being considered as, which had previously just been a list of live animals effectively. So the more major changes are to clause 6.4, which was amended by the lawyers as put in a specific requirement instead of just referring back to the LGA for the council. So we had a specific thing to base the bylaw on instead of bouncing it off the Local Government Act. Clause 10.1 was an addition recommended by the roading team to allow for different temporary structures. As outlined in 10.1, it was quite rigid on what you're allowed. Didn't say, it said any of the above, but not any other potential options. And within the temporary structures, the roading team outlined that fences weren't allowed or permitted within the current bylaw, so they suggested adding these in. So farms can use electric fences if it's going across a road, things like that. And it basically just ensured clarity that fencing was permitted within the permit, as that was something they suggested was needed. So the recommended consultation is this, similar to the Cemeteries Act, and it's outlined between 17 and 20. And apart from that, is there any questions on the bylaw as well?
Through the chair, problem with this excessive economics and determine by the authorised officer. How are they going to determine what that is? Because excessive, or what I think excessive, and what I think is quite different. I've had neighbours that think if they can't walk the letterbox in their slippers, it's excessive. So there's no definition of what excessive is on there.
I'll let the officers answer that, but I did consider that myself, and then I thought, I can't think of any other way to measure it. But I'll let you guys answer that.
I think it might be something that we'll talk to the roading team based, and we could write out what the exact definition of it. It was recommended by the lawyers to have it in there, as currently in the bylaw where it just talked about just the word excessive excrement, and it was trying to figure out who defines that in terms of the bylaw. So we just put it on the authorised officer there, but if it's needed, we can definitely go to the roading team and see what their thoughts on that one is as well.
And just further to that, so most bylaws, they have obviously the relevant authorised officer. That's the operational team who deals with this day to day. So they would get a working understanding of what is probably appropriate. I mean, yes, there may be kind of a bit of leeway in there, but they would develop their understanding of what's.
I suppose my concern is that authorised officer is going to be rung up over considerable times by that person that wants to walk to the letterbox in his slippers. So his definition, his tolerance to it, it actually needs to be, be influenced by that. And then there's something about temporary crossings.
Page 64.
Yeah, I know there is a lot of farms that use temporary takes across the road. And especially if they're on a very low volume road. And they really do cut back the end of shit on the road. Because the cows are flowing.
Yeah.
And I suppose from my perspective, we use a lot of cattle stops and concrete, and to mitigate my neighbour that wants to walk to the letterbox in the slippers. So, because you can't put an underpass everywhere. because they're just too expensive.
Thank you, Hamish.
With regard to what's excessive, it's not uncommon for officers to have to use their judgment. So if you have a look at, for example, under the Resource Management Act, the issuing of an excessive noise direction, it's what the officer deems to be excessive.
You normally got decibels.
No, you don't have decibels. No, you don't. You go along and you listen with your ears and you make a decision as to whether the noise is excessive. You're not using a meter. If you're using a meter, you have to be trained in the use of a meter. You have to record all the conditions. You have to understand the background noise conditions, and it's a really skilled job using a noise meter. We don't use noise meters. We use our ears, and we say to a reasonable person that noise would be excessive. And it's the time of day, all sorts of things come up.
I suppose
It's the same as shit on the road. At the end of the day, someone has to make a determination that it's too much.
I suppose I use a good example. I used to go across the road on Midbury Road with cows all the time. I used to go across the road on Napier Road between Ashurst and Palmerston every day with 7,000 cars a day. I never have anyone complaining. You know, some similar cows go into a rural environment with less people, dairy farmer and a sheep farmer, they're complaining every second day. So you have to define these things, and so it does mean the council, I know you're saying it's up to them. My experience was, it was a nightmare here versus living in the middle of the city.
So your experience with the council was a nightmare?
Or the authorised officer making the decisions, because they're particularly influenced by the people ringing up and hounding them or whatever. And so, and then the next thing that's a problem with it is they never say who it is, so you can't sort out the issue. So it's a flawed, but that's Resource Management Act, you know, it's a flawed system. So I like to define what excessive is, but I don't know how you do it, so.
Can I just
I
ask?
mean, we see bylaws in other districts where they require rollout mats to be put out across the road.
Yeah.
Or during cattle crossings. And we're trying to avoid that sort of situation. We're asking that the operator of the property takes some responsibility for not leaving excessive amount of shit on the road, and that you know, if there are complaints, that officers take a reasonable view and say, yeah, that is excessive, well, that's not excessive.
Can I ask, do we have any historical issues with excessive mistreatment? I mean, as councillors, we get, you know, that our weekly customer services requests, and I don't recall in my tenure ever seeing anything of that nature on there. Is it? Oh, I mean, I guess I don't think we have an issue.
Yeah, I can recall a couple of experiences, a couple of situations. Yeah.
Recently? Or?
Oh, no, probably.
That's why I was.
Probably 5 or 6 years ago.
So, I mean, I guess this was advised by the lawyers to have it in there so that these officers have a methodology to deal with something that might fit that criteria.
Yeah. So we use the term, but the term wasn't defined.
Yeah.
And I think Aidan, when we talked to the roading team, they didn't mention this issue.
No, they didn't outline it as anything, no. They specifically said, I think it was said that I don't think there's been a roading permit since the 2016 Kaikoura earthquake. It's apparently used to be that the main ones that get full were crossing the Waiau Bridge, and since the earthquakes, they've all been done by trucks now.
Yeah.
So it hasn't probably been a major issue recently, I imagine, but. Yeah.
Did you have a proposal to change the wording or a different definition, or are you comfortable having, you know, voiced your concern?
Oh, I suppose the lawyers have said it needs to be in there. Is that a good reason? I suppose it is. But you know, as long as we police it like it is in the past. Now, I fixed my problem for 140,000, you know, because I don't like causing grief. So I fixed my problems on my roads by having cattle stops and back in the days of John White, great guy. So I haven't had that experience in the last 10 years of coming up with it, So permits and cattle stops, I'm talking about going across the road. And local roads, there's plenty of stock cutting up and down the roads, and I'm sure they're not done on permits anyway. So your permit, and there has been a change. People aren't going to walk through Waihao Township and across the bridge so much now. So there's a change in that philosophy where you will truck them. So I'm more talking about crossings.
So are you comfortable that we've explored that in enough depth for the moment? Or?
Yeah.
Right, thanks, Dave. Councillor
I
McPherson.
just wanted to add through the chair that sometimes some things need to be a subjective measure, and I think this is one of them. Whilst I understand what you're saying.
Any other questions or comments? So I noted again that the officers are recommending that we agree to, Karen.
You're right. I just wanted to ask if our bylaw is consistent with NZTA's rules. Consistency. Is that something we need to take into account?
So,
For crossing roads.
right, so any highways, obviously NZTA will apply, this applies to our.
Yes, I know, but I just thought you've got some specific things in here, and I thought it might be easier from a farmer point of view if our bylaw aligns with the sorts of things that NZTA might want to have. If you have Donor Farm that's on a corner of a State Highway 7 and Smith Street or something.
Yeah.
It's just a thought, I don't know.
So we did obviously consult with the roading team.
Yeah.
So we would imagine that they're obviously aware of the NZTA guidance and would have made us aware of anything like that, but we could have another look at that. With the NZTA guidance.
Right, it could be a quick question that is completely fine and it doesn't matter, but I thought I'd just ask it because it came to my mind.
Good question. So I do note that the recommendation that's in front of us does suggest that we agree to public consultation on the proposed amendments. So I feel quite confident that that gives us a good process for anything that we may have to adjust. So with that, is there anybody, thank you, Councillor Davies, willing to move the officer recommendation as it's written on page 52? Someone who's willing to second that, please. Thank you, Councillor Armstrong. Any further questions, comments? Anyone wishing to speak for or against? No, all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? And that is carried. Thank you very much, Stephanie and Ada. And yeah, we look forward to seeing the public consultation on those policies, bylaws. Okay, so we are moving to item 2.4, dangerous, unsanitary and affected building policy review, page 67. Welcome, Scott. Nice to see you. I'm going to throw the floor open to you.
Right. Through the chair, as always, taking the report, updated policy and statement of proposal as read. Very much this is just a refresh of an existing policy that council has that we have to have following a desktop audit by the Ministry of Building and Innovation and Employment's Building System Delivery and Assurance team. They have given us a gentle reminder that it was overdue for review and encouraged us to do so. So the actual policy itself, it's just, like I say, had a bit of a refresh, recognising some of our changes in council officers' job titles, removing to reflect some of our more recent policies and our language that we use. And similarly has also, at the request of MBIE, got some specifics in there about our guiding principles to which I've just directed back to council's compliance and enforcement policy that gives more details about our enforcement policies when we are following up on this and all about enforcement. So that's pretty much all I've got. So yeah, open it to the floor for questions.
Okay, thank you, Tom.
On page 73, it says approach. And it says council will take a passive approach. I wondered if we should have a more active approach if we actually do identify or are drawn to our attention buildings maybe in dangerous and unsanitary, because a passive approach means, oh well, we drive past it every day, we know it's going to fall down, and we know that there's storing something dodgy in there. You know, we've seen piles of tyres that we've just driven past and ignored for years. Is passive enough? That just sorry.
No, through the chair, I guess it's not saying it's the passive there is meaning that the council doesn't go out actively auditing properties to identify if they meet this criteria. So it's certainly not indicating that once a building's brought to our attention, we're not passive in following up on it. That is reflected in other parts of the policy where it talks about, our response will be commensurate to the risks. So, but I mean, that language in there I'm not disagreeing with the point you're making there. Could tweak that wording slightly to make that a bit more, make that differentiation. Certainly once we act, we're not passive. But neither are we out there. There's not 100% audit of buildings in the district.
Okay, happy with that, Tom?
Yeah.
Karen.
Just a quickie thing above that, I think you might have wrong spelling principles in there.
Thank you. Appreciate your ignorance.
Also, just going down a little bit, being dangerous and or unsanitary, where the cause of the problem can be rectified immediately, that's obviously not taking further steps or formal steps under the Act. Do we need to say anything in there about, like, would that be sort of checked up on? Like I can imagine a property owner might in the moment say, yes, I'll get that sorted. But do we need just a little catch-all, something in there that gives you the right to go back and say, actually, it's a month later and it hasn't happened? No, I just leave it over the top.
Through the chair, maybe not over the top, but I think certainly handled within our compliance teams.
So maybe informally check up anyway.
Yes, and I mean, I would think that certainly if someone, again, their business as usual, and I see this, hear about this in this interaction, they may say, give me a week or 2 weeks, and they will recheck within that time frame.
If that happens.
Just the important thing is that this is a policy to guide officers on these things. We have operational ways of dealing with things, which have to comply with the policy, but I don't think the policy says you must do this, and then you must do this, and then you must do this. The policy is a guidance document to help officers understand the intent of council when we're dealing with dangerous and sanitary buildings.
I understand that. I just thought it's now that I understand how it's given effect to in practice, I'm comfortable. Put it that way.
I guess for counties, it's one of those policies that we would use 2 to 3 times a year if we and one of those policies, I guess that you don't need until you really need it, and forms one of the tools in the toolkit of our compliance team. This being at the extreme end of the spectrum.
Thanks for that, Scott.
I guess we've made the point in the Audit and Risk Committee today that we treat a lot of our powers as reserved rather than express. So if we can resolve something with a landowner without saying, I have this power and I'm requiring you to take this action and here's a notice and all this. If we say, look, mate, that building's dangerous, and if you did this and this to it, it would be okay. And they say, yeah, okay, I'll do that. You go back in a couple of weeks and I've done it, then job's done.
Sure.
So that tends to be the basis that we approach these things on. Now, if we go back a couple of weeks later and it hasn't been done, then Henry will be writing about a section 124 notice, and that'll be that.
Thanks for that clarification. Mara.
Cool, thank you. Great to see in your policy statement that you're reflecting the words thriving, dynamic and resilient district from our strategy. So well done. That's awesome. Thank you. And I know you're just revamping the words, but I just wanted to just check out how that would apply in practice. So, over the page on page 74, where it talks about the paragraph where the building and property manager has concerns about the health of the occupants, and it goes on with revised wording to say who will refer the occupants to the appropriate social services. So how do we make, I mean, the environmental health officer will make that determination on who those appropriate services are, or because I just really wanted to find out how that would apply in practice, of how we would determine who those would be. And I understand it's only a revamp of the words, but yeah, just in that context.
Through the chair, I was speaking to Diane Morrison on just that subject earlier this morning, because I was to part of my preparing for today. And I mean, it would depend. It might be Oranga Tamariki, for instance, if it was children, could be the various agency within Te Whatu Ora, call to the medical centre. Yeah, for example. So I guess would vary depending upon the individual circumstance and the nature and criticality of their needs. Could be I guess the maximum of this policy, someone is shut out of their home. Yeah. You're not allowed to get back into your home for very good reason, of course. So the welfare assessment and referral that goes with that.
So is the occupant of that house informed that those services are going to be referred to? Like how does that step in the process work?
So the environmental health officer would physically do that assessment with them, I would imagine. Yeah, but would she inform? She would do that assessment and would make an assumption that service X is required. Would she inform would the officer inform the homeowner in that instance that they're going to make that referral to the appropriate agency? They would be well informed.
The officer would check with the homeowner to see that they're comfortable that that reference is made. So you're going to refer them to the temporary accommodation service, and we'd say you could be eligible for temporary accommodation through ENB. Do you want me to check in with ENB for you? If they say no, we won't do it.
Okay. And then, so that leaves the occupant, and I'm just trying to flesh out what would happen if they actually said no. If they said yes, that'd be great if you get me temporary accommodation to make, because my house is inhabitable because it's got no flushing toilet or whatever. But if that person said no, I don't want you to refer me to anybody, then we would use the powers that you've talked about earlier, like the step process.
So if somebody says they don't want to be referred, they don't want to be referred. This is actually just the rules around how you deem the place to be. Policy that covers deeming places to be insanitary or uninhabitable.
So if that's the explanation, maybe it should be who may refer the occupants, because they might not necessarily, but they might, depending on, will means I'm going to, if you're not willingly going to accept the service, I'm jolly well going to do it anyway, and that might be appropriate and fair if it's the welfare of children or blah, blah, but it might be that it's, depending on the circumstance. So I guess that's what I was trying to flesh out and understanding how that would happen.
Yes, and we have softened that wording from the current policy. The current policy read to ensure appropriate medical.
Yeah,
And that was raised by the compliance team as a,
yeah,
for similar reasons, we're not going to.
yeah,
Yeah, so
Yeah.
slightly softening it to may.
yeah.
Anyway,
Anyway, I mean, it's semantics, isn't it, really, but that's all good, thank you.
Yeah, we just want to be careful in that situation. We don't leave it to the discretion of the officer whether they think it's appropriate to or not. Well, I may approve it, but I may not, because I don't like it. So I think you need to be very careful. So will, with the cooperation of the property owner or something like that, or the assent of the property owner, because we want to put the onus on staff to say council's preference is that you refer these people if you have the approval of the property owner.
Yeah, with the consent and approval of, yeah, something like that, okay.
Or may,
Yeah.
if deemed necessary.
Anyway.
Because if, well, I guess
Well,
I guess what I'm saying though is like if the example that Mara gives is you know, you're considering referring to a temporary housing and the person says no, that might be because they've got mum or dad or sister that they can go and stay with. So therefore it may not be deemed necessary. But yeah, is that too much discretion on the officer's part?
I mean, what you're trying to do is convey the will of the council. I think the will of the council would be that if someone wants some help,
Yeah,
we try and find them some help.
exactly.
And I think
If they don't want to be helped, that we let them be. I mean,
Except for when you might use the absolute powers if it's whatever.
child engagement.
Yeah, that's right. So, I mean, I think there is some words that could be couched in there that actually would give us give officers good direction, should they need to understand that or interpret that policy. Yeah. Anyway, it's not done with that stuff, Scott. I'll leave it to you.
Roger.
Because I guess this will come back after public consultation, won't it?
Correct. So the time frame is, assuming a hearing is required, is that we'll go out for a month's consultation and then get signed off by full council before the year of the House Council.
Okay, so we're comfortable with leaving that with Scott to
Yeah, I'm comfortable.
make some adjustments. Vanessa, you've been waiting very patiently.
Yeah, and because of that delay, I'm going to go back to page 73 and Scott, yeah, I'm actually uncomfortable mucking around with the word passive in our approach, because if we were to remove it or change it, it actually conflicts with our intent and scope. And it makes it quite clear in our intent and scope that we are taking a passive approach, and that when we do act, we will act quickly. And I personally feel that the council's approach needs to be passive in this instance, and I think this was something that we discussed with our remits recently with the LGNZ, and I maintain that approach. I would not like to see the word passive removed or changed. Speak, council.
So are we comfortable with that as it stands at the moment, given that the following sentence kind of gives clarity? Council officers will actively respond to any reports, information received. So that allows the whole, we're not going out looking, but we are going to respond.
I support Teresa's, that's actually.
We've got to be careful too, and that we're dealing with private property, so there's a very fine line as well.
Yeah,
So
I agree.
Okay, yeah. Tom.
Yeah, just a quick one on page 79. How can I have my say? First paragraph, it says return it by the 30th of November. And in big bold letters further down, it says Monday the 25th of November.
Let me pass that check.
Councillor Armstrong.
Yes, I just have one last point, in both on page 75, where it talks about the record of dangerous and sanitary affected status. This is land information memorandum, and then it talks about a similar thing for heritage buildings. I seem to recall we had a time when the property market was really hot and people were getting title searches, but they weren't getting the limbs, you know. So I just wanted to check, if I was going to buy one of these properties, could I do a title search and not discover that? Like, is it a
Correct.
separate document?
Correct.
And is that something we need to be concerned about?
The process of getting it registered against the title is pretty cumbersome and, I mean, people either get a limb or they don't, and that's on them.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, we come at a lawyer's cost and a fee, you don't want to.
Yeah. So there's nothing on the building, right? It's not like the old red zone.
there'll be a dangerous and sanitary notice on the building.
Yeah.
And it's an offence to remove that dangerous and sanitary notice from the building, and it's displayed in a prominent place on the building, Henry, is the wording. So it should be,
Yeah.
if you go
So
and
should
view
it, yeah, you should,
the property.
Yeah.
It should be there, if it's not somebody's committed an offence or it's somehow.
and I'm comfortable with that. I just thought,
If you were asking if someone could have had a dangerous sanitary notice on a building and removed and then not divulged that at sale,
Yeah.
if you didn't get a limb, then yes, you would not know that, but that would be.
Vendors are required to disclose
Caveat.
yes these days, yeah, and purchasers, of course, need to that's their due diligence, isn't it? Yeah.
thanks for.
Anything further? Okay, it feels like we are ready to look at the officer recommendation on page 67, which is approving the draft policy and adopting the statement of proposal and going to public consultation. Is there someone with a willingness to move that? Thank you, Councillor McPherson. Someone to second? Thanks, Councillor Armstrong. Any further questions, comments? Anyone wishing to speak for or against? All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Abstentions? Carried. Thank you, Scott. And that brings us to the end of our agenda today. So with that, I will close the meeting and I'll propose that we just take 10 minutes to allow our workshop set up and make a cup of tea.